the predator, and the judge. The night wrapped itself in silence, broken only by the faint scuff of hurried footsteps. In a dimly lit alley, a man darted between shadows, his breath visible in the cold air. He muttered to himself, clutching a briefcase to his chest as though it held his salvation. From the darkness above, Sythras watched. His skeletal form blended seamlessly into the shadows, his hollow eyes fixed on the man below. Hunger stirred within him, not born of malice, but as natural and unavoidable as the rising tide. Sythras descended soundlessly, his movements fluid and predatory. The man stopped, sensing something, but it was already too late. Sythras's skeletal hand clamped over his mouth as his teeth sank into the man's neck. The muffled cry faded as crimson life poured forth. "Is this how far you've fallen, Sythras?" The voice echoed through the alley, calm yet commanding. Sythras froze, his hollow sockets narrowing as he withdrew from his prey. The man crumpled to the ground, unconscious, but alive. From the darkness stepped Eldritch, his gaunt face partially obscured by his long, tattered coat. His silver hair glinted faintly in the dim light, and his sunken eyes bore an ancient, unyielding power. Sythras tilted his head, his tone dripping with mockery. "Eldritch, the philosopher, come to deliver another sermon." Eldritch's eyes flicked to the man on the ground before returning to Sythras. "Another life, taken without thought, without reason. Tell me, Sythras, what purpose do these creatures serve in your endless cycle of hunger?" Sythras stepped closer, his skeletal form looming over the elder vampire. "Purpose?" he said with a faint smile, his voice dark and mocking. "What purpose do they serve? You and I have existed for centuries, Eldritch. These creatures live for but a fleeting moment. 200 years ago, their kind had the same petty worries, the same shallow dreams. They wanted love, wealth, power. They stressed over things that no longer matter. Tell me, who remembers their names today? They are insignificant." Sythras's tone carried a chilling finality, his words laced with contempt. Eldritch didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his voice steady but resolute. "Yes, they live for but a short time, and because of that, each year, each day is more precious to them than a decade of our eternity. Their lives are fleeting, but they are rich in meaning. We, Sythras, are the ones who are empty." Sythras's faint smile faded. He tilted his head slightly, as though considering the words. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy and unbroken. Then Sythras laughed, a hollow, echoing sound that seemed to ripple through the shadows. "Ah, Eldritch, always clinging to your quaint morality. But you know, though we are kin, we are as far apart as the spider and the fly." He stepped even closer, his presence suffocating, his voice cold and low. "You know, of course, that no elder is my equal, not even you. I am as death itself, a force beyond comprehension, and you, Eldritch, are but a parasite, feeding with restraint, pretending to be noble, a wolf dressed as a sheep." Eldritch's jaw tightened, but he did not step back. "And yet, you waste your eternity feeding without thought, like an animal trapped in instinct. Tell me, Sythras, are you truly death, or are you simply afraid to be anything more?" The words hung in the air, a challenge unspoken. Sythras's hollow eyes glinted faintly as he leaned forward, his skeletal face inches from Eldritch's. "Afraid?" he repeated, his voice almost a whisper. "You are bold, Eldritch, but if you seek to test the truth of my words, you need only say so." The silence was deafening. The unconscious man groaned softly on the ground, a stark reminder of the predator who loomed above him. Finally, Sythras stepped back into the shadows, his form fading as though it had never been there. "When you are ready to accept your place, Eldritch," he said, his voice drifting from the darkness, "you know where to find me." And with that, Sythras was gone, leaving only the stillness of the night and the faint sound of Eldritch's measured breathing. Sythras sat in his lair, his skeletal frame cast in flickering light from the monitors on the wall. Images shifted rapidly across the screens, news reports, city streets, faces of strangers who would never know his name. His hollow eyes scanned them with detached indifference. Without turning, he spoke, his voice calm yet commanding. "You may enter, Elder." From the shadows, Eldritch emerged, his tattered coat sweeping behind him. His silver hair caught the dim glow of the monitors as he surveyed the cavernous space. "Oh, this is cosy," he remarked, his tone tinged with dry humour. Sythras finally turned, his expression unreadable. "Eldritch," he said, his voice dripping with mockery, "you reek of lichen. Tell me, are you their pet now?" Eldritch chuckled softly, stepping further into the room. "Sythras, I've not come to trade insults or to fight. I've come seeking your aid." At that, Sythras let out a cold, hollow laugh that echoed through the lair. "You wish me to help you?" he said, shaking his head. "With what exactly? Your little crusade against Thorn? Your friend Winter? Stuck forever in that place? All of it is beneath my concern. As for Thorn, he knows better than to cross me. He stays clear for a reason." Eldritch folded his arms, his gaze unwavering. "Sythras, you still fail to understand. This isn't about petty rivalries or grudges. This is about survival. The balance." "Balance," Sythras interrupted, his tone mocking. "There it is again. Your precious illusions, balance, purpose, survival. You still don't see the truth, do you, Eldritch? I am none of those things. I am the one who hunts, who kills. I am death for those I hunt. None have ever escaped me, for who can escape death?" Eldritch remained silent as Sythras rose from his chair, towering over him. His tone grew darker, more menacing. "And you misunderstand something else, old friend. That I would somehow spare you. That I would not destroy you if it served my purpose." Eldritch took a cautious step forward, his voice calm but firm. "Sythras, we've known of each other for centuries. We've crossed paths more times than I care to count. We could work together, help each other." Sythras showed no emotion, his gaze hollow. "I tire of you, Eldritch. You are weak, like all the elders before you. I have hunted and killed many, and you are no different." He paused, a faint smile curling across his skeletal face. "But you may be of use to me yet." Eldritch raised an eyebrow. "How so?" Sythras's smile widened, his tone turning sharp and cruel. "It has been far too long since I've had a worthy hunt. Make no mistake, Eldritch, I am going to destroy you, but I will give you time. Time to run, to hide like the mouse you are. And then, my old friend." His voice dropped to a chilling whisper, venomous and evil. "I am going to kill you." Eldritch's eyes narrowed as he attempted to reason with Sythras. "This is madness, Sythras. I didn't come here to fight you. We have larger enemies." Sythras cut him off with a wave of his hand. "The countdown has already begun, Eldritch. I suggest you make the most of it." Realizing the futility of arguing, Eldritch vanished into shadow, retreating into the darkness as Sythras stood motionless, watching him go. When he was alone, Sythras turned back to the monitors. His skeletal hand hovered over the controls as he spoke to no one, his voice low and dark. "It has been so long since I've hunted an elder." The shadows in the room seemed to deepen as Sythras sat back in his chair, anticipation simmering beneath his hollow gaze. The hunt had begun. Eldritch moved through the city like a wraith, his body dissolving into shadow and reappearing in the next darkened corner. He raced through alleys, rooftops and abandoned buildings, the night a blur around him. Each leap through the darkness brought him farther from Sythras' lair, but the dread in his chest only deepened. He paused briefly in the shadows of an old crumbling warehouse, his breath shallow and uneven. For the first time in centuries, he felt the sharp, gnawing edge of helplessness. He knew it was only a matter of time before Sythras caught him. Sythras was no ordinary predator. He wasn't driven by rage, vengeance, or even hunger. He hunted because it was his nature, an inevitability that made him unstoppable. Eldritch leaned against a rusted wall, his hands trembling as he tried to focus. Thoughts raced through his mind, each one darker than the last. There was no one he could call upon for help. "The Alpha Prime," he muttered to himself, the words laced with bitter hesitation. The Alpha had aided him once before, but Eldritch knew even he would struggle against Sythras, and to involve him would be to risk the life of a friend. He shook his head. "No, I can't drag him into this. Not against him." He closed his eyes, picturing those he might call upon, Elder, Sarana, the Alpha, each a powerful force in their own right, but they were already consumed by their own mission, the desperate fight to save Winter. "Even with all of them," Eldritch whispered to the shadows, "they wouldn't stand a chance." His thoughts turned darker still. Winter, the only one whose power could rival Sythras's. But Winter was the reason Eldritch had sought Sythras's aid in the first place. Now his reckless choice had dug him deeper into peril, and there was no escaping it. He pushed off the wall and moved again, leaping through shadows with increasing urgency. Every step, every shift through the darkness, felt heavier. He could feel Sythras's presence looming behind him, unseen, yet inevitable. In a fleeting moment of stillness, Eldritch stopped atop a desolate rooftop, the city sprawling below him in fractured lights and distant sounds. His eyes scanned the skyline, but all he saw was a world that felt impossibly vast, and yet impossibly empty. He clenched his fists, his voice barely a whisper. "I've faced death countless times, but this is different." The shadows around him seemed to shift, almost as if responding to his despair. Sythras was coming. Eldritch could feel it in the marrow of his bones. He straightened, his expression hardening. There was no one to call, no one to save him. He was alone, and even if he fled to the farthest corner of the world, Sythras would find him. For the first time in centuries, Eldritch felt the crushing weight of his own mortality. His next move would not determine if he survived. It would only delay the inevitable. With a grim resolve, he vanished into the shadows once more, racing through the city in silence. Each step echoed a singular thought in his mind. No one can stop him. The city pulsed with life, a labyrinth of lights, shadows, and unsuspecting prey. But tonight, a new force moved through its veins, silent and deliberate, carrying the promise of death. Sythras had begun his hunt. From the rooftop of an abandoned building, Sythras gazed across the sprawling metropolis. His skeletal form stood motionless, blending into the darkness. The faint glow of his hollow eyes scanned the city below, and a cold smile curled on his face. "No elder has ever survived my hunt, Eldritch," he whispered, his voice carried away by the night wind. "But I must admit to feeling something. Anticipation, perhaps. A flicker of excitement." His words hung in the air as his form seemed to ripple and shift, his edges blurring with the shadows. "I have watched you for centuries, my philosophical friend. You've grown in power. Yes, but power means nothing against inevitability. Against me." He tilted his head slightly, his smile widening. "And death, Eldritch, is coming." With that, Sythras disappeared into the darkness, his movements as fluid and silent as a shadow slipping across the ground. The hunt began. Sythras moved through the city like a lion entering the savannah. He stalked through alleyways, his hollow sockets scanning every crevice and corner. His steps made no sound, his presence unnoticed by the bustling life around him. He was the apex predator, and the city was his hunting ground. A stray cat darted across his path, pausing for a moment as its fur bristled. It hissed into the shadows where Sythras stood, sensing the unnatural force before bolting into the night. Sythras smiled faintly. Even the beasts know when death is near. He climbed the side of a building with inhuman ease, scaling the bricks like a panther, stalking through treetops. From the rooftop, he surveyed the streets below, his gaze piercing through the chaos of city life, the hum of traffic, the glow of neon signs, the murmur of countless conversations. All of it faded to insignificance as he focused on his prey. "Eldritch," he murmured, "you're good at hiding. I'll give you that. But hiding doesn't save the gazelle from the lion. It only delays the inevitable." He leapt to another rooftop, his movements as graceful as an eagle diving toward its prey. His skeletal hands touched down with barely a whisper of sound, his hollow eyes scanning for the faintest trace of his target. Far below, a man hurried through the streets, clutching his coat tightly as the wind picked up. He glanced over his shoulder, his unease growing with each step. He felt it, the weight of something watching, something unnatural. But it wasn't the man Sythras was after. He was simply another insect in the predator's domain, insignificant and unaware of the true danger lurking above. Sythras's form blurred as he moved along the edge of the building, tracking the faint traces of shadow energy left behind by Eldritch. Each movement was deliberate, calculated, like a panther closing in on its prey. "Run, Eldritch," Sythras whispered, his tone dark and mocking. "Run as far as you can. The hunt is the only part that interests me." He descended into an alleyway, the air around him growing colder as he passed. His skeletal hand reached out, brushing against the brick wall, sensing the faint echo of Eldritch's shadow power. He closed his eyes, his hollow sockets faintly glowing. "There you are," he murmured, his voice a mix of satisfaction and menace. The thrill of the hunt coursed through him, a primal energy that made him feel truly alive. It was not emotion. Sythras had none of that, but an instinct, the natural response of a predator who had caught the scent of its prey. "Eldritch," he whispered again, his voice soft but filled with malice. "You can't escape death." And with that, he vanished once more into the shadows, the city trembling under the weight of the apex predator on the prowl. Thank you for watching this tale of Sythras and Eldritch. If you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the Professor Shadow channel to stay updated with new and thrilling tales. Your support helps keep the shadows alive. If you'd like to help the Professor bring more stories like this to life, consider becoming a channel member. Your membership ensures we can continue crafting these dark and haunting adventures for you. Thank you for being part of the journey. Eldritch darted through the shadows of the city, moving with a speed only an elder could muster. Each time he reappeared in the faint glow of a streetlight or the darkness of an alley, he felt it. Sythras was gaining on him. The predator's presence loomed like an inevitable tide, washing closer with every step. "Pointless," Eldritch murmured to himself, his voice low and trembling. "He is beyond me, beyond any elder. I cannot outrun him, I cannot best him, and reason is wasted on him." He stopped for a brief moment in the shadows of a derelict rooftop, his silver hair tousled by the wind, his hands clenched tightly, though not with anger or defiance, but with resignation. He looked out at the sprawling city, his mind racing. "How does one escape death?" he whispered, his breath forming a faint cloud in the chill air. The answer came to him, stark and unrelenting. Eldritch closed his eyes, his voice steady now. "One does not." He exhaled long and slow, as if releasing centuries of fear and struggle. "I must embrace it." His words lingered in the night as he stood still, his figure framed by the faint glow of the moon. Memories flooded his mind, countless centuries of evading death, of believing himself above its reach. "I have struggled for my entire existence," Eldritch muttered. "I have run from death more times than I can count. As an elder, we think ourselves exempt from death's call, untouchable, but as a man, I sought the ultimate escape from it. I traded mortality for immortality, thinking I had defeated it." He shook his head, his voice resolute. "But even as an elder, I have been running from death all this time. Sythras is not a hunter, he is death itself. Today, I stop running." Eldritch's form shimmered as he shifted back into shadow, his body melting into the darkness. With supernatural speed, he moved through the city, darting from street to street, his destination clear in his mind. It was nearly dawn when Eldritch arrived at the entrance to Sythras's lair. The hidden entrance loomed before him, a forgotten building that had long since been swallowed by the city's sprawl. Its exterior was unassuming, dilapidated, crumbling, and veiled in shadow, but Eldritch knew what lay beneath. He descended into the tunnels, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. The flickering of faint, artificial lights created a rhythmic hum, interrupted by the occasional spark. Eldritch felt the weight of the place pressing on him, as if the lair itself was alive and watching him. He walked deeper into the labyrinth of corridors, each step echoing in the stillness. It was silent, save for the faint hum of machinery and the distant crackle of monitors. Eldritch's silver hair shimmered in the dim light as he moved with purpose, his fear replaced by an eerie calm. "This is where it ends," he said softly to himself. "I have lived for centuries, granting others the gift of eternal life, the gift to cheat death. They believed I was their salvation." He paused, his voice now a whisper. "But I, too, have been running from the predator I have always known would come." Eldritch stepped into the central chamber, Sythras's lair. The walls were lined with monitors, flickering between images of city streets, news broadcasts, and faint, shadowy figures. The room pulsed with a cold, unnatural energy. He stood in the centre, his hands folded calmly in front of him. "Today, I embrace it," he said, his voice steady and unshaken. The room was silent save for the hum of the monitors. Shadows danced unnaturally in the corners, and Eldritch could feel it. Sythras was near. He closed his eyes, letting the weight of centuries fall away. For the first time in his endless existence, Eldritch felt no fear, only acceptance. "I shall meet the predator in its own lair," he whispered. "If I am to die, let it be here, in the shadow of the cycle I can no longer outrun." And so, Eldritch waited, standing alone in the darkness, the faint flicker of monitors casting fleeting shadows across his face. Death was coming, and he was ready to greet it. A voice slithered from the shadows, dripping with malice. So, the lamb wanders into the wolf's den, Sythras said, his skeletal figure emerging from the darkness. The flickering glow of the monitors cast jagged shadows across his hollow face. His tone carried a faint amusement, but it was undercut by an edge of anger. An interesting hiding spot, Eldritch. Did you think I would not sense you here? Eldritch stood tall, his frame battered but unbroken. He met Sythras's gaze without flinching. No, Sythras, he replied calmly. I knew this would be the one place you would find me. Sythras's hollow eyes burned faintly, and for the first time in centuries, an emotion broke through his cold demeanour. Anger. It radiated off him like a storm. You dare challenge me? He hissed, his voice rising. You cannot best me, Eldritch. No elder has, and no elder ever will. Eldritch raised a hand, silencing him. Challenge you, he said with a faint, weary smile. No, Sythras, I embrace you. Come, take your kill, but I will not go quietly. For centuries I have run from death, afraid of its embrace. Today I want to see it up close and personal. I want to face what has haunted me for so long, what has made me so afraid. Eldritch's smile widened as he took a step forward, his voice growing stronger. And so far, I am unimpressed. Sythras tilted his head, a sinister smile spreading across his skeletal face. So be it, he said softly, his tone a whisper of doom. Eldritch lunged, his body a blur of supernatural speed and strength. He unleashed everything he had, centuries of power, knowledge and skill, throwing it all against the force before him. The air crackled with energy as his attacks tore through the room, shadows clashing like a storm, but it was futile. Sythras moved as though time itself bent to his will. With a single motion, he unleashed an attack that struck Eldritch with overwhelming force, sending him crashing to the ground. The impact cracked the concrete beneath him, and for a moment, the air was still. Sythras loomed over Eldritch, who lay crumpled and broken, his breath shallow. Noble. Eldritch, Sythras said, his voice a mixture of mockery and respect. Very noble. Most are too afraid to try and fight. But you are different. Such a shame it ends for you this day. Eldritch, his vision blurred and his body failing, forced himself to look up. His voice was faint, but steady. Then end it, Sythras. I welcome death. I have outlived my place in this world. I have already stayed far too long, cheated death for centuries. It's time to pay the price. Sythras tilted his head, intrigued. Interesting, he murmured. The prey finally understands its purpose. It is inevitable that death wins in the end. He raised his hand, his shadowy energy pooling into a final strike. Goodbye, Eldritch. As Sythras prepared to deliver the killing blow, Eldritch's voice cut through the silence one last time. Winter, my old friend, I'm sorry I could not help you, but you have helped me see what I truly am. Eldritch turned his fading gaze to Sythras, his voice barely a whisper. You think yourself free of death, Sythras, but know this, when Winter is free, and he will be free, he will come for you, and I wonder, will you be ready to embrace death as I am? The words lingered in the air as darkness consumed Eldritch. A creature who had extended and cheated his life for so long was finally at peace, one with the cycle he had spent centuries avoiding. Sythras stood over the lifeless form of Eldritch, silent for a moment. Then he smiled, faintly, coldly. Come, Winter, Sythras said to the empty room. This old lion is ready. The shadows deepened around him as he turned away. The predator, retreating into the lair he called home, ready to await the next inevitable turn of the cycle.